Now, another big story this week was France. All eyes on France. Macron has been a busy boy. He hosted Keir Starmer, a very interesting visit for the leader of the opposition to head there. And then he hosted a big state visit for the King and Queen. It was very much heralded as a success. King Charles became the first king to address the French Senate and attended a lavish state banquet attended by Mick Jagger, Hugh Grant and the former Arsenal manager Arsene Wenger. But what is the state of Macron's France? Because remember, this visit by the royal family had to be postponed because earlier in the year there were terrible riots and protests in France. A lot of anger, a lot of very raw anger facing Macron domestically and internationally. And a lot of people as well looking at his influence in sub-Saharan Africa, which was always an important relationship for the French president to have. So what is the state of Macron's France? Well, joining me now, I'm delighted to have a brilliant journalist in the studio. Nabila Ramdani is a journalist. She's also an author. She's just written a really fascinating book as well called Fixing France, How to Repair a Broken Republic. Nabila, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Ayesha.
Look, Nabila, let's move now onto your book because it is a fascinating book. Your book is called Fixing France, How to Repair a Broken Republic. Now, progressives in this country often hold Macron aloft as this example of an absolute beacon of brilliant progressive politics. He's doing marvellously. He's great. France is great, much better than Britain. You've got a slightly different take on that.
I do, because some people, including myself, would argue that the institution that replaced the French king is a quasi-monarch. And there is certainly some truth in that. The President of the Republic has always been a man, and he has an enormous amount of power, as well as multiple palaces and a huge security state looking after him. And Emmanuel Macron is in particular, he's often accused of acting like a monarch, not least of all because he prefers to govern by decree rather than through parliamentary votes. So he's seen as being arrogant, as being aloof, and I can assure you that there's nothing new about this, as I make clear in my book, which is an analysis of modern France, where France is at in the year 2023. And it looks at the kind of personality who runs France and how its institutions work. It is very much a hard-hitting critique of France. And the book is neatly divided into 10 themes from politics, social policy, protests, foreign affairs, economic feminism, education. And it shows where France is failing. But it's also a constructive critique, if you like, because it offers solutions to these fundamental fault lines. And one of the major critiques is that, as epitomized by President Macron, French presidents come across as old-style reactionaries who think that the system works well. The reality is that the system only works for the super rich. And in that sense, Macron himself fits in completely in the mold of the Republican monarch model that de Gaulle himself envisaged when he founded the Fifth Republic. And the Versailles banquet that he threw for the actual British monarchs was a prime example of that. So he relished being surrounded by the rich and the famous. And this is instead of being a modern, radical president working for the people.
And one of the other aspects that you highlight in your book, which I think is very interesting, particularly in light of some of the protests that we've seen recently in France, is race relations in France. And there's a number of different strands on this. What is your sort of assessment? You make an argument that you feel Britain is faring better in terms of race relations than France is at the moment. Just to tell us a bit about that.
Well, very much so, and it has a lot to do with the two countries' colonial history, if you like, which were handled in quite a different manner. The book is probably the first one written by someone like me, meaning a French person of Arab background, of Muslim background, who grew up on a housing estate, which are well stuck out on the periphery of major cities in France. And
your parents are
from Algeria.
Yeah.
So I know France very well. I know a lot of British, love France, go to France, have properties in France, and they are fascinated by that country, but don't tend to know it that well. I was born and brought up in France, and I've interviewed through my work as a journalist a lot of establishment figures, but I've also lived and grew up and worked on those council estates, on those banlieues within disadvantaged ethnic minority communities, which qualifies me perfectly to debunk this Republican myth of liberty, equality and fraternity for all. I can assure you that modern France is only that on paper. And we see it regularly through incidents, or worse, like the shooting of the 17-year-old teenager this summer, Nahel Merzouk, French of Algerian background. And this kind of antagonism is constant in France. Let's not also forget that modern France, the makeshift Fifth Republic, if you like, it emerged out of the war of Algeria. So, this complicated relationship with the conditions, the circumstances in which the French Republic was born led to the rise of extremism, an all-powerful president who acts like a monarch, and the rise of far-right party, which is now threatening to deliver a head of state.
And it's so fascinating to look at all the political currents in France, because, as you say, Marine Le Pen is sort of waiting in the wings. We've had social unrest as a result of France's policy of almost trying to be colourblind and religion blind and very, very secular, and a lot of social unrest, the Gilets jaunes we remember from a few years ago as well. Well, Nabila, it's been so interesting speaking to you, and your book is such a fascinating read. If you are interested in French politics, I highly recommend this book, because it's not just all a counsel of despair, but it is quite a kind of honest appraisal of where the politics are, the economics are, the race relations, the social cohesion and the social tensions are. The book is called Fixing France, How to Repair a Broken Republic. Nabila, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.